The police department exists to protect and serve the citizens and the community. Should the police department be accountable to the citizens? What would it look like to have police accountability to the community? And why is that important? For a perspective from an activist and historian on this matter, grab your pen and paper. You will want to take a note.
He's the face of our future, tutoring and mentoring tomorrow's leaders. She's the face of hope, helping communities recover from devastating disasters. He's the face of independence, making sure that those who need assistance can remain in their own homes. These are the faces of experience, making a difference for generations. This is Senior Corps. Visit nationalservice.gov. This message brought to you by the Corporation for National and Community Service.
Hello and welcome to the Clarion Call TV show. I am Janice Liggins, your host. Our police department is indeed in place to protect and serve the citizens and the community we live in. We need the police. We depend on the police. As we all know, however, there have been times when some police officers go off script and take matters into their own hands. This is not new for our county. Join me, though, in welcoming Mr. Jonathan Hutto, Senior Founder and Executive Director of the Prince George's County People's Coalition. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad to have you here because you're an interesting character to me, an interesting figure in our community is more appropriate because you've been doing activist work for a long time, all the way back to even in college at Howard University. Tell us a little bit about how you got started and why.
Howard University, 1995 through 1999, until this very day, were some of the greatest years of my adult life. So I first got involved in activism in the fall of 1996. I was a sophomore in Charles Drew Hall, and we had a campus-wide voter registration, education, and mobilization campaign that year known as Operation Vote Bison. I was a volunteer coordinator, which meant I was the de facto coordinator of Vote Bison on the campus, and that campaign really sparked me into that career. But I really want to use the word calling of sacrifice, of giving more than we receive individually, but also receiving from the mass produce that we're able to give to a mass populace. Over 3,000 students registered to vote, and subsequently I was elected president of the Howard University Student Association going into my junior year.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful. And I know as part of, while you were there in school, you met a young man who is also very active in the community. We call him Stokely Carmichael. And you have another name for him.
Oh, when I met him, and I'm glad you called him a young man. At that time, he was 57 years old. He went by the name of Kwame Ture, but he was known to your generation when he was a younger man as Stokely Carmichael. At the time that I met him through an organization known as the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And I met him through some of his comrades who were organizing there on the campus. Their slogan, their theme was that students and youth were the spark of the revolution, were the spark and catalyst of mass change in our society. And so I always tell people that February 17th, 1998, at Andrew Rankin Memorial Chapel at Howard University, that was a watershed moment in my life because up until that point, I was in what you call a leadership development vacuum. But Kwame Ture shifted me, if you will, from a leadership development lens to an organizer lens. He used some themes and some dictums that night, 9 months before he passed from this life, that forever changed the way that I engage the community and engage humanity as a whole.
Wonderful, wonderful. And you were influential in getting the university to acknowledge him just before he passed. No, I guess it was posthumously, an honorary doctorate award or something like that, was it?
Yeah, well, the next year, that year when I was student body president, we hosted him for what became what we call his last fireside chat. And I talked about one of those dictums, and one of those dictums was that the struggle is eternal, that there's no easy victories, that there's no time for us to just sit back, relax, and enjoy life. The next year, I was elected to the Board of Trustees, and as a student member of the board, we introduced a resolution to have Kwame Ture honored. In fact, we wrote it 3 weeks before he passed, late October 1998. He passed on November 15th, 1998. But our Board of Trustees, our president at the time, H. Patrick Swaggart, the chairman at the time, Frank Savage, they approved Kwame Ture getting that honorary degree posthumously. His mother, May Charles Carmichael, was there to pick up that degree.
Wonderful.
Yeah, at
His
my
mother.
commencement when I graduated.
Well,
Yes,
good
yes.
for you. That had to be a graduation present in and of itself for you.
Oh yes, I cherish it. I cherish it. Not just as a moment symbolically, but I cherish it as a calling. Because I saw Kwame Ture. Now I see him as one of the best that Howard University has ever produced. His example of frontline activism, graduating with a BA in philosophy in 1964, and then going straight to Mississippi and putting his body on the line, on the front line of the Civil Rights Revolution at that time, and really and transforming that movement to a self-determination movement, one in which we went from being called Negro to Black almost overnight because of the injection of that call for Black power and self-determination there in Greenwood, Mississippi. So I always highlight him, not just from a historical perspective, but as a living embodiment of what we can do as a people today in 2018.
Well, you went straight from college on into living that organizing
Yes.
when you went into ACLU.
Yes. That was my first paid job out of undergrad. I graduated May 1999. I had given quite a bit on the campus, and to be honest with you, hadn't really thought about a career. But I was fortunate to have some mentors and some big brothers in my life. In this instance, Matsamela Mfumo, Mark Thompson, one of the founders of the then Umoja Party. You can hear him today on SiriusXM and MSNBC and other places. But Mark at that time was chair of the NAACP task force in D.C. And actually was instrumental in getting me that position at the ACLU, which became my first training ground, and which really leads me to how I'm able to sit here and have this discussion with you today.
You've done a lot, because you went on from there. You headed 250 student chapters with the ACLU as outreach?
With Amnesty International.
Amnesty
International.
Okay.
With the ACLU, my primary job there as community outreach director was around the principle of civilian oversight of law enforcement. So the ACLU National Capital Area was focused in 3 regions: Montgomery County, Washington, D.C., and Prince George's County. In Prince George's County, the focus at that time was to reform the existing Citizens Complaint Oversight Panel to get it more power, particularly around subpoena power and also investigatory power. But Amnesty International, where I transitioned to that position, I continued that work I've been doing with the ACLU, along with helping to support, service, and lead over 250 youth and student chapters through a 5-state region.
And there was and I think in some ways still is, the notion that racist police brutality has been systemic in Prince George's County, Maryland. That's a quote from some papers that I had seen earlier. Is that still as true now as it was before, do you think?
I think that Prince George's County is no different in terms of its challenges than any other police department in the country. I think there are some differences. I think if you were to compare the Prince George's County Police Department today to police departments across the country, you would see a more diverse police department, diverse in terms of the actual demographic of officers who serve in the police force. Prince George's County is unique in the sense that it does have a form of civilian oversight, Citizens Complaint Oversight Panel. Today, most jurisdictions don't have that. In fact, in the state of Maryland, Prince George's County and Baltimore City are the only jurisdictions that have any form of civilian oversight. So I think that makes it unique. But even with those institutions interwoven into the fabric, which came out of struggle, by the way. I mean, politicians in Prince George's County did not wake up one morning and just say, I'm going to be benevolent and give you a civilian complaint oversight panel. That came about through struggle in the late 1980s, through a number of police shootings. One case, the case of Gregory Habib, a Ghanaian immigrant in Langley Park who was crushed to death in the late 1980s. That helped to spark and bring about a Blue Ribbon Commission appointed by then County Executive Paris Glendenning, which brought about the CCOP. So I think that there is some progressive norms in Prince George's County, but we still have a lot of challenges in Prince George's County, because when I came into the county back in 2000, well, I first came in 1999, but by the summer of 2001, the Washington Post had done an analysis which said that Prince George's County Police, its department, in comparison to the 50 largest in the country, had killed more citizens per capita than any other police department in the country. That was 17 years ago. That was the impetus for what brought me and a number of activists into the county, ultimately why I ended up making the county my permanent home.
And that also led to the Department of Justice taking a look at the county and bringing about that memorandum of understanding. Is that what sparked that?
Yes. So at the time that we first got involved, when I say we, I'm speaking of the Prince George's People's Coalition, what became the coalition. When we first got involved, there was an investigation of the K-9 unit. But if you read Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi was a classmate of mine at Howard University. There's another classmate of ours he speaks of in that book named Prince Carmen Jones, who was a classmate of ours, shot and killed in Fairfax County September 1st, 2000, by another Prince George's County police officer, Carlton Jones, no relation, a black officer, trailed him from Hyattsville through the district into Fairfax, violated internal police code. Supposedly, he said he was following an unmarked vehicle, doing undercover work. Prince Jones was unarmed. He was dead. He was shot and killed that night. There was no justice in that case. There was no internal. In fact, Gerald Wilson, who was the internal police chief at that time, the first black chief in this county, his last act before he left was to exonerate Carlton Jones. But the point, to get to your point, is this: that case is what forced the DOJ, or pressed them, to then expand it to what they call a pattern and practice investigation, to look at the entire department as a whole. So we got involved. At first trying to leverage local officials, but then we came to the determination there was no will on the part of the local officials at that time. County executive at that time was Wayne Curry, Gerald Wilson, Chief John Farrell. There was no will to bring about any reform, so we had to go directly to the Department of Justice. And in the summer of 2001, we held 3 landmark hearings where we actually organized survivors of police brutality to have their stories recorded with actual investigators from the DOJ, and that helped to break that thing wide open. We mobilized over 100 plus citizens in this county to have their testimonies recorded. It was landmark.
To have to go directly to the Department of Justice to seek justice and to overcome the lack of will within the county, that in itself was landmark. That was brave. That was totally out of what you had learned from Kwame Ture. See, I remember. but good for you. Good for you, and for starting the organization that you did, the Prince George's County People's Coalition. We're going to put a note in it for right now. We're going to come right back to it, okay? Thank you. Right. So what rights do you have as a citizen when things go wrong, and what can you do? That's next. Stay tuned.
Everything starts out small. The things that hurt us, they all start from somewhere. The words we say, the things we do, that can grow into something else. What was small and innocent can become big and sometimes scary. All it takes is one comment, one picture, one video for something to catch fire. But a big problem doesn't need a big response. Not at first. Even if we don't know what to say, the eye emoji can be that first step we take. Let's all pledge to take that first small step together and change the world in a big way. I'm a witness, and so are you.
Welcome back. We are continuing our conversation on police accountability. Our questions: has the county shed the historic police brutality practices of old? And why should the community now ensure police accountability to the citizens? With us again is Mr. Jonathan Hutto, founder of the Prince George's People's Coalition. Jonathan, again, thank you for joining us. So let's pick back up. One of the things that we've seen lately is some legislation has been passed that actually modified the Bill of Rights, the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, where police generally had 10 days before they could even talk to an investor or had to talk to an investigator. Now that's been cut back to 5. What other kind of things do you think need to be done? And what led to that first, and then what other kind of measures do you think needs to be done?
I first went to Annapolis in 2000 during the Enough is Enough movement, the case of Archie Elliott III, which was the case that first brought me out here to Prince George's County alongside folks such as Walter Fauntroy, Joe Madison, Mark Thompson. We went back in 2001. That was the first time it was a bill that I was involved with. It was introduced by then House Delegate Rashawn Baker to reduce the number of days known as the 10-day rule. At that time, to reduce it to 3 days. This is a rule where if an officer is involved in an excessive force act, they do not have to be questioned. They're not questioned, in fact, for 10 days. And the bill failed in the House. I believe it was Delegate Valerio was the chairman of that committee. So your question is, what is it that pushed legislators in Baltimore to finally move towards LEOBOR, the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights? And that, what moved them was what took place in Baltimore in the aftermath of Freddie Gray. In the aftermath of Freddie Gray, young African-American male that went on that infamous rough ride in the back of that police van. When the ride was done, his spine was severed, and he died subsequently later afterwards. The residents, the citizens of Baltimore, their instant level, their tolerance level had been reached, and that anguish and that pain poured out into the streets. And as Frederick Douglass said over 150 plus years ago, that power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what the people will submit to, and you have found the exact amount of injustice that will be imposed upon them. So when the instant level of the people in Baltimore was reached, that's what forced the legislators in Baltimore in Annapolis to move towards some small modicum form of reform. And in this case, we're talking about the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, the lessening of the 10-day rule to 5 days. Now you have a longer period to file complaints. It used to be 90 days. Now it's a year. But most importantly, and from where we sit, the most important reform that came out of that was the law. It is law that citizens can be appointed to serve and act on internal police trial boards. This is different than the Citizens Complaint Oversight Panel. The internal police trial board is charged with levying discipline on officers who have gone rogue, or officers who have gone bad, or officers who are bad. Why is that important? Because up until now, the trial boards were only stacked with those middle managers in the police department. Why is that problematic? I'll give you an anecdote. The case of Desmond Ray. Coming out of our movement, out of that Washington Post series I mentioned to you earlier, we came up with 12 of the most egregious officers. One of the officers on that list, we call it the Dirty Dozen list. It came from the Washington Post. One of those officers was an officer by the name of Charles Ramseur. He responded to a supposed stakeout, if that's the right term to use, in 2002 in District Heights, where an unarmed African-American male who was not a suspect he was following was shot by Officer Ramsey and was paralyzed from the waist down. His name was Desmond Ray. Charles Ramsey was investigated. He was brought before an internal police trial board. And in 2005, that internal police trial board fully exonerated him. He has received pay raises since then, and to our knowledge, is still on the police force somewhere. That's just an anecdote of why that trial board is so problematic. So we applaud the actual law being passed. We met with Chief Stawinski in the fall of 2016 not to lobby, but to find out the implementation of citizens being on internal police trial boards. And the response that we received as activists was ambiguous at best. That there had to be some sort of working out through the collective bargaining agreement with the FOP. But if it's law, then it's law. So I think one of the things we have to do as a community right now is find out where exactly we are in that process of citizens being on police trial boards, and what's the process through which a citizen is appointed to internal police trial boards.
The Huffington Post reported in 2015 that when citizens complain to cops about cops, the Internal Affairs Division usually decides the officer did nothing wrong. That's a direct quote from the Huffington Post. And I think what you're saying is we see that played out in many times in everyday actions. But then just a few months ago, October, the Washington Post reported that the Department of Justice was again looking into and investigating police misconduct, mostly for hiring, discrimination and human resource issues. Those officers who had reported a complaint were now getting some type of victimization within the office for telling on another officer. And that was just October 17. And so there obviously are some continuing issues and matters that need to be addressed. And so what is the role of the citizen in addressing these and bringing voice to this? What would you say to the average citizen they should do?
You know, one of the tools that has become the tool, if you will, in addressing police brutality and misconduct has become that smartphone. Everybody's phone now is a video camera. My generation, Generation X, we were the Rodney King generation. I mean, that was the case that lit us on fire, because we could see exactly what happened to Rodney King there in Los Angeles. But that was from a video camera someone had coming out of a hotel room. Now everyone has these smartphones. So what did that mean in Prince George's County? Well, it meant in Bowie several years ago, where this officer Santiago, wanted to impress his friends and put a gun to the head of a black man, that gentleman's friend was videotaping the entire incident. And the state's attorney, in this case, Angela Alsabrook, and her staff could see exactly what happened. We applaud the state's attorney for not only seeking an indictment, but getting a conviction in that case. And Officer Santiago was sentenced to 5 years in prison. So again, we have challenges in Prince George's County, but I have to juxtapose those challenges with what's taking place across the country. Videotaping across the country doesn't guarantee convictions. In Prince George's County, we've seen a few. And I would say that in this current state's attorney, this office has probably been the most willing of all the preceding state's attorneys. When we first came out here, that was Jack Johnson, that was Glenn Ivey. We as activists did not often feel the willingness from the state's attorney's office to prosecute police officers. But in the case of this current state's attorney, Officer Santiago is in a prison cell somewhere serving 5 years for that act. And we've seen school resource officers, particularly one out of Suitland High School, get a 60-day house arrest for beating a young man in the school. So we've seen that, but we want to see more. We want to see a consistency with it across the board. But I have to applaud this county again in comparison to the rest of the country. We just had Black Lives Matter Week in Prince George's County. And so I see that, again, as an extension of what we as citizens have been able to do. But to come back to your principal question of what we can do, we have to be vigilant. We cannot wait on politicians to do that, which we can do for ourselves and organize on the ground to do for ourselves. Everyone has a smartphone. Everyone should download the ACLU app. There's an app from the ACLU. If you see an officer pull someone over, they usually have another car behind them, you have the right to stand and videotape and to witness on behalf of the community to make sure that that person is treated in accordance with the law and that they're able to go on about their daily business. We have the right to do that. And so I believe that we have to bring that power from within ourselves and not wait for the system, quote unquote, to do it for us.
So many people suffer from what we've called the fear factor, intimidated to report for fear of retaliation or for any other, or fear that it'll just fall off the wayside. What do you say to those people? And I know you've said before that one-on-one to the police, they may be a little intimidated, but if they have opportunity to speak to another group, they may be more forthcoming. And was that the COP you were talking about with that, or what other group?
I'm definitely I'm a two-pronged advocate. What I mean by that is, I believe that citizens should utilize the Citizens Complaint Oversight Panel. It was won through our activism. We should utilize it. Number one, because when you have, if an act of police misconduct takes place, whether that's harassment, whether that's the worst could be excessive force, or even the worst could be death, or any form, it could be lesser harassment, you should definitely file a complaint, because that's what the CCOP is there for. You don't have to walk into a police precinct to file a complaint. The Citizens Complaint Oversight Panel is an agency of the county government. It is staffed not by uniformed officers, but by citizens who look like you and I, they wear regular clothes, what have you, and file a complaint, and then you can follow that complaint and see where the adjudication process takes place with that complaint. So we have to work to make our government work for us.
Yes.
While doing that, as I mentioned earlier, tools like the ACLU app are things that we can use as individuals to witness in our community when we see officers pulling people over, if we see officers show up to a house, if we see anything with police that we suspect, I strongly suggest the ACLU app. But then in the third piece I would say is that I strongly encourage people to get engaged in an activist organization on the ground that's doing this work, such as the Clarion Call, such as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the National Association for Advancement of Colored People, the Prince George's People's Coalition, as Kwame Ture taught us. We have to be organized as a people. If you're not a part of an organization, then you're actually not involved in the process of making our society and our county better. If we actually were to organize at the same level that those organizations and folks internal and external to the county hate us. As Kwame used to say to us, the reason why the Ku Klux Klan terrorizes us is because they are organized. They have meetings every week. Their members go to the meetings every week. They study racist ideology. Then they go out and institute programs for it. They even have uniforms and things like that.
Took off the hoods and put on a suit. Thank you, Jonathan. This has been great. We're out of time right now, but this has been great. I'm looking forward to working with your organization. Appreciate you. Amen. Amen. If you have experienced any type of policeman misconduct, it is your right to report it. Contact the Citizens Complaint Oversight Panel to report the incident. And if you're hesitant and not sure what to do, contact the Clarion Call. We will document your incident and connect you to the resources and support you need. Help to ensure the police are accountable to the citizens that they are sworn to protect and serve. That's it for now, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Join us next time, won't you, for the Clarion Call. Until then, I'm Janice Liggins. Blessings to you.